William Shakespeare's well-known tragedy, Macbeth. As we know, William Shakespeare was an Elizabethan poet-playwright. That is, he lived and wrote most of his poems and plays during the time of the Tudor monarch Elizabeth I. He is widely considered one of the greatest dramatists in English. Speaking on the fecundity of Shakespeare's imagination, Alexander Dumas, the French writer, said, "After God, Shakespeare has created most." Before we proceed to the details of the play, let us learn a bit about the dramatist. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 at Stratford-upon-Avon in England as the son of John Shakespeare and Mary Arden. John Shakespeare was an alderman and glover. Mary Arden belonged to a wealthy land-owning family. Shakespeare probably immortalized his mother's family name in the forests of Arden in As You Like It. William Shakespeare was probably educated in a grammar school whose curriculum consisted of Latin grammar and classics. His contemporary Ben Jonson has observed that Shakespeare knew small Latin and less Greek. At the age of 18, Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway, who was 8 years his senior. James Joyce puns on the name of the couple when he says, "If others have the will, Anne Hathaway." With Anne, Shakespeare had 3 children, a daughter by name Susanna and twins Hamnet and Judith. Sometime after 1585, Shakespeare left for London, the capital city of England. In London, he started a successful career as a writer, an actor, and part owner of a drama company called Lord Chamberlain's Men, which later came to be known as the King's Men. Shakespeare started writing plays in a traditional manner, adapting available plots and stock dramatic devices. But later he came to be known for his insightful originality, especially in the creation of characters. He even aroused the envy of some of his fellow playwrights, such as Robert Greene. Shakespeare's plays were staged at many theatres: the Theatre, the Curtain, and the Globe. He lived in London for nearly 3 decades. After that, probably he retired to his hometown, Stratford-upon-Avon. He died on the 23rd of April, 1616. In 1623, that is 7 years after Shakespeare's death, 2 of his friends, John Hemming and Henry Condell, published a volume called the First Folio. It's a collected edition of Shakespeare's poems and plays. Shakespeare's surviving works consist of 38 plays. These include collaborations as well, 154 sonnets, and 2 long narrative poems, Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis, and several other poems. Shakespeare is generally considered the most popular writer in English. His plays have become immensely popular. They have been translated into every major language. They are studied, interpreted, and performed more than the works of any other playwright. His plays are usually classified into comedies, tragedies, and historical plays. Some scholars also add categories such as chronicle plays, Roman plays, problem plays, and dramatic romances. Tragedy is a dramatic genre which deals with human suffering. Why does the hero or heroine of a tragedy suffer? According to the ancient Greeks, the cause of a tragic hero's suffering is what they called hamartia. The word hamartia is often translated as a flaw or defect in character. But a more precise meaning of the word hamartia is a mistake. Macbeth is a tragedy of ambition. It is one of Shakespeare's 4 great tragedies. You know the names of the other tragedies? The other tragedies are Hamlet, Othello, and King Lear. Macbeth is the shortest and the most impressive of these tragedies. It seems to have been written sometime between 1603 and 1607. The play was also subject to several revisions. It is about a regicide and its aftermath. In other words, it is the story of an ambitious, conscience-stricken and imaginative general who is driven by his wife or by his ambition to murder his king. Let us now explore the characteristics of Shakespeare's tragedies. As in classical tragedies, Shakespeare's tragic heroes are men of high state and noble status. In Macbeth, the protagonist is a Scottish general. He is also a close relative of King Duncan. King Lear is the king of Britain and Hamlet is the prince of Denmark. The plot of a tragedy is about the evils that befall a conspicuous person like this. Another feature of Shakespeare's tragedies is that they end in the deaths of both the hero and the heroine. In Macbeth, both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth die. This is also true of plays like Romeo and Juliet. Both the hero and the heroine die at the end of the play. There is a moral order in Shakespeare's plays. As the plot of the play advances, this moral order collapses or deteriorates. The overall impression is one of waste. Power, glory, intelligence, all values which people cherish and call men to action perish. Unlike in classical tragedies, this has little to do with fate. The reason for the deterioration in Shakespeare's tragedies is the human will to evil, moral corruption, or human wickedness. We must remember that Shakespeare's emphasis is not on the physical death of his heroes. It is on the idea fall of a good man. The consequences of this fall are significant for the hero. For Macbeth, life loses all meaning after he has committed his crimes. He delivers a soliloquy when he hears of Lady Macbeth's death. In this memorable soliloquy, he articulates the futility of human life. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It is a speech of pessimism and despair. It also speaks of the vanity and absurdity of human life. But if you look at this passage very carefully, you can find something else also. Macbeth is also trying to draw some kind of consolation from the meaninglessness of life. If life itself has no meaning or purpose, then his crimes are also meaningless and he might be saved. It is also significant that Shakespeare employs the theatrical metaphor in this passage. Perhaps he is suggesting that life is also illusory like dramatic art. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Why do you think the word tomorrow is repeated? For Macbeth, life has lost its organic unity. So every day is merely a meaningless, monotonous and absurd repetition of the previous day. Shakespeare's words are so dense in meaning. They provide profound insights on life and human nature. Shakespeare also depicts abnormal states of mind in his tragedies. This includes insanity, somnambulism and hallucination. King Lear goes mad, Ophelia commits suicide, Macbeth hallucinates, and Lady Macbeth walks in sleep. The dramatis personae of Macbeth include Duncan, King of Scotland, Malcolm, Duncan's eldest son, Donald Bain, Duncan's youngest son, Macbeth, a general in King Duncan's army. He was originally the Thane of Glamis, then Thane of Cawdor, and later King of Scotland. Lady Macbeth, Macbeth's wife and later Queen of Scotland. Banquo, Macbeth's friend and a general in King Duncan's army. Fleance, Banquo's son. Macduff, Thane of Fife. Lady Macduff, Macduff's wife. Macduff's son. Then we have the Scottish Thanes, Ross, Lennox, Angus, Menteith, and Caithness. We had Seward, Earl of Northumberland and General of the English forces. Young Seward, who is Seward's son. Satan, Macbeth's servant. Hecate, goddess of witchcraft. And the three witches who predict that Macbeth will become a king. Shakespeare's source for the tragedy of Macbeth was the account of King Macbeth of Scotland, Macduff, and Duncan in a book called Holinshed's Chronicles. Holinshed's Chronicles, published in 1587, was a history of England, Scotland, and Ireland. But Shakespeare changed the story and character of Macbeth given in Holinshed's Chronicles. His criterion was not historical accuracy but artistic efficacy. Macbeth opens amidst thunder and lightning. The three witches, or the weird sisters, agree that their next meeting shall be with Macbeth. As the scene changes, a wounded sergeant reports to King Duncan that Macbeth, one of the king's kinsmen, and Banquo, another general, have just defeated the combined armies of Norway and Ireland, which were led by the traitor Macdonald. Everyone praises Macbeth's loyalty, bravery, and fighting prowess. The passage is quite ironic. It is ironic because soon Macbeth will also turn out to be a traitor like Macdonald. When the scene changes, Macbeth and Banquo enter, talking about the weather and their victory in the battle. Soon, the three witches greet them with their prophecies on a lonely heath. The first witch hails Macbeth as a Thane of Glamis. The second hails him as a Thane of Cawdor. The third witch hails him the king that shall be hereafter. As Macbeth appears to be stunned to silence, Banquo challenges them. They prophesy that Banquo's descendants will be kings, though he himself will not be one. Soon, message arrives that the title of Thane of Cawdor has been bestowed upon Macbeth. Thus, the first of the witches' prophecies is fulfilled. This functions as a trigger for the rest of the action in the play. Macbeth is brooding. It seems that he has already made up his mind to become the King of Scotland. He sends a message to his wife, Lady Macbeth. The message talks about the witches' prophecies. When King Duncan decides to stay at the Macbeth's castle at Inverness, Lady Macbeth hatches a plot to murder King Duncan and secure the throne for her husband. Macbeth is a little apprehensive about regicide, but his wife succeeds in persuading her husband to follow her plan. He murders Duncan, but he is so shaken that Lady Macbeth has to take charge. She places the daggers on Duncan's sleeping guards so as to frame them. Early in the morning, Lennox, a Scottish nobleman, and Macduff, the loyal Thane of Fife, arrive. A drunken porter opens the entrance of the castle. In his state of drunkenness, he thinks that he is the porter of the gates of hell. This situation is also quite ironic. The murder of Duncan has just occurred, and Macbeth's castle has become literally a hell. Macbeth leads the noblemen into the castle, and Macduff enters Duncan's chamber. He discovers Duncan's corpse. In a feigned fit of anger, Macbeth kills both the guards before they get a chance to proclaim their innocence. Macduff is suspicious of Macbeth, but he does not express his suspicions openly. He has to be politically correct. Fearing for their lives, Duncan's sons also flee from the land. Malcolm to England and Donalbain to Ireland. Being the closest relative of King Duncan, who is in Scotland, Macbeth ascends the throne. Macbeth is uneasily conscious of the witch's prophecy about Banquo and his descendants. He invites Banquo to a royal banquet. He learns that Banquo and his son Fleance are to ride out that night. He hires assassins to kill them. The assassins succeed in killing Banquo, but Fleance escapes. Meanwhile, at the banquet, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth invite the lords of the country to a night of drinking and merriment. At this point, Banquo's ghost enters and sits in Macbeth's place. Macbeth grows furious, but only he can see the ghost. It is a subjective ghost. The others panic when the king rages at an empty chair. But now Lady Macbeth takes control of the situation. She tells the guests that her husband has been suffering from a harmless malady. A disturbed Macbeth visits the three witches again. Remember that this time he seeks out the witches. They conjure up three spirits with three prophecies and warnings. An alarmed head tells Macbeth to beware of Macduff. A bloody child warns, none born of woman shall harm Macbeth. A crowned child holding a tree states that Macbeth will never be vanquished until great Burnham Wood comes to high Dunsinane Hill. Macbeth is lulled into a false sense of security by the witch's ambiguous words. He is informed that Macduff is in exile in England, so he orders the execution of Macduff's wife and child. Lady Macbeth collapses psychologically from the guilt of the crimes she and her husband have committed. She walks in sleep and tries to wash away imaginary blood stains. The sleepwalking scene is one of the most memorable in the whole of Shakespeare. In England, Macduff is told about the slaughter of his family. In Scotland, Macbeth is increasingly seen as a tyrant. Malcolm leads an army, also joined by Macduff, and Seward the Senior, the Earl of Northumberland. When the army is camped in the Burnham Wood, the soldiers are asked to cut down and hold tree limbs in order to camouflage their numbers. Thus, the witch's first prophecy is fulfilled. Meanwhile, Macbeth learns about the death of his wife. Then he delivers a soliloquy on the futility of life. A soliloquy is a dramatic device by which an actor expresses his thoughts and feelings. The purpose of a soliloquy is to convey the thoughts and feelings to the audience. In the battle that follows, Macduff confronts Macbeth. Macbeth boasts that he does not fear Macduff because no one born of woman will be able to harm Macbeth. Macduff declares that he was prematurely ripped from his mother's womb. That is, he was born of Caesarean section. In this way, the witch's second prophecy is also fulfilled. Macbeth realizes too late that he has misinterpreted the witch's words, or they have deliberately misled him. Macduff beheads Macbeth, and the first prophecy is also fulfilled. Malcolm is placed on the throne of Scotland. Then what happens to the witch's prophecy about Banquo and his descendants? James VI of Scotland, who assumed the throne of England as James I, was supposedly a descendant of Banquo. Let us now explore the major themes of the play Macbeth. What is the play ultimately about? The play Macbeth has attracted much scholarship and many speculations. Some scholars see Macbeth as Shakespeare's complement to King James I. These scholars tell us that Shakespeare sought to flatter King James I by developing the story of Macbeth. King James I traced his descent to Banquo, an imaginary Scottish gentleman of the 11th century. The king must have been pleased by the ancient supernatural predictions of his glory. Secondly, Shakespeare's characterization of the witches in the play also must have pleased the king, because the depiction of the witches corresponds exactly to the king's belief in witches, as he put it in the scholarly treatise Demonology. Shakespeare presents the witches as wrinkled, ugly women who have sold their souls to the devil for the gift of prophecy. Seeking and accepting the help of the witches, Macbeth is also partly guilty of trafficking with the devil. So, in a way, Macbeth is about man's bondage to evil. Other scholars see the play as the exploration of the mind of a killer. They go to the extent of calling Macbeth a butcher and Lady Macbeth a fiend. They admire the profound character studies offered by Shakespeare. With great dramatic skill and profound psychological insight, Shakespeare presents Macbeth as a victim of criminal ambition. There is nothing wrong with ambition, but in Macbeth's case, it is an ambition to seek and possess what is not his. Even before Macbeth meets the witches, this ambition is inherent in him. In fact, the slumbering ambition makes him more amenable to the witches' suggestion. This is clear from Macbeth's response to the witches' prophecies. He listens to them with rapt attention. He broods over the prophecies. He is also anxious about the prophecies. The course of action suggested by ambition is perilous. Soon it becomes a passion. We know that Macbeth murders the king in order to secure the throne for himself. Many critics view Macbeth as a historical play which deals with the punishment for treason. But Macbeth is insecure in his ambition even after he secures the throne for himself. The murder of Banquo is undertaken partly from the resentment that the fruit of his labors should be enjoyed by Banquo's descendants. Macbeth embarks upon an orgy of crime and murders Macduff's wife and children. A few critics prefer to call Macbeth a Christian tragedy which traces in detail the damnation of the soul. Many have detected in it the elements of a morality play. The porter in the play also speaks in the Calvinistic fashion of damnation. Macbeth is ridden with guilt. Despondency overwhelms him. He cries out in agony and despair. He cannot find meaning or purpose anywhere in life. This is surely the most harrowing vision of spiritual isolation ever to be realized in drama. The disastrous consequences of Macbeth's ambition are not limited to him. During Shakespeare's time, people, including King James, believed in the divine right theory of kingship. The king was considered the regent or deputy of God on the earth. Thus, rebellion against or murder of the king was considered not only a crime against the state, but also a sin committed against God. From the moment of King Duncan's murder, Scotland is portrayed as a country shaken by the inversions of the natural order. Scotland experiences violent weather conditions. The witches' lines in the first act, "Fair is foul and foul is fair," summarizes the inversion of order. Hierarchies are tampered with. The great chain of being is upset. Moral and political degradation is paralleled by perturbations in nature. Among the inversions of the natural order is a disturbance of sleep. In the regular order of nature, one part of the day is meant for work and the other part is meant for sleep. But after Macbeth murders Duncan, he hears a voice saying that Macbeth has murdered sleep. This statement is figuratively mirrored in Lady Macbeth's sleepwalking. Supernatural elements abound in Macbeth. The three witches, called the Weird Sisters, and Banquo's ghost are the two notable examples of the supernatural. Shakespeare's depiction of the witches follows contemporary belief. In the play, they represent forces of darkness, chaos, and conflict. But are they capable of originating evil in men? The question is, are they mere witness to evil or are they agents of evil? It is true that the witches' prophecies lead Macbeth to murderous thoughts, but it is also true that he has this inclination to do evil even before he meets the witches. After he meets the witches, this temptation to do evil takes a concrete shape. In fact, the witches approach Macbeth because they know that he is more amenable to their suggestions than Banquo. Of course, the witches' prophecies and equivocal statements lead him to his ultimate doom. Their prophecies are morally neutral. Macbeth has the full freedom to choose his course of action. In other words, he has free will. Shakespeare's versatile genius has given the world a wide variety of heroes and heroines. They have a certain depth and complexity. As a result, they are subjects of perennial interest. The character of Macbeth is presented in a progressive manner, a downward progress from good to bad and from bad to worse. Throughout this process of deterioration, Macbeth is shown as intensely human, essentially noble and good, and yet susceptible to evil. Consequently, the character of Macbeth is realistic and credible. Though at the end of the play, Macbeth has become a monstrously wicked man, he is not a morally cold villain who deliberately chooses evil for his guard. Until Macbeth yields to the temptation of becoming the king himself, he is known for his loyalty and bravery. People talk about these qualities of his. Even after he has embarked upon his career of crime, he is constantly plagued by his conscience. He has a very sensitive conscience, and this sensitive conscience makes him hate every act of evil as he commits it. He tries to stifle the warnings of his conscience, but he cannot suppress the warnings entirely. Macbeth's physical courage stands in sharp contrast to his moral cowardice. Due to this moral cowardice, he is unable to resist his wife's desire to make him the king and commit Duncan's murder. He commits the subsequent murders with less agitation. It is this moral cowardice which makes Macbeth a tyrant as the plot advances. He becomes distrustful, treacherous, and cruel. We have already seen that the cause of this moral cowardice is Macbeth's excessive ambition. Ambition is one trait that defines Macbeth's character. Closely linked to Macbeth's excessive ambition is his capacity for lively imagination. He sees the air-drawn dagger which seems to move towards King Duncan's chamber. He also sees a vision of Banquo's ghost. A.C. Bradley, who has written on Shakespeare's tragedy, says that it is through imagination that Macbeth is kept in touch with supernatural impressions. It is also through his imagination that Macbeth is made liable to supernatural fears. All the intimations of conscience and honor come to Macbeth through his imagination. In fact, his better nature expresses itself through his imagination. It is Bradley's contention that if Macbeth had obeyed only his imagination, he would have been safe. But Macbeth's imagination also becomes the instrument by which Nemesis avenges the crime. In comparison with Macbeth, Lady Macbeth appears only a few times in the play, yet our understanding of her character is quite comprehensive. Lady Macbeth is one of those commanding, awe-inspiring figures whom one finds in Shakespeare once in a while. She is called the Clytemnestra of English tragedy. She is as ambitious as her husband, but she is more practical in attaining the object of her ambition. This is evident from her response to the witch's prediction. Macbeth is somebody who listens to the witch's prediction firsthand, but he experiences a conflict in his mind regarding what to do. The prediction is only reported to Lady Macbeth, but the flame of ambition possesses her in a moment, and she starts working on the realization of that ambition. Lady Macbeth also has an inflexible will that keeps or appears to keep her imagination, conscience and feeling in check. She knows her husband's weaknesses. She also knows that she has to goad her husband into committing the murder. Lady Macbeth has a hypnotizing effect on her husband. She displays great self-control and presence of mind even in moments of great danger and horror, as in the murder scene and the banquet scene. Her resourceful practical intelligence makes her behave in a calm manner. But it is her excessive willpower which proves to be her ruin as well. Her imperious will makes her impose upon herself and bear a strain which is beyond the endurance of the rest of her powers. Soon her resistance collapses and she becomes a nervous wreck. In other words, she collapses psychologically because she has artificially hardened her otherwise tender nature. In the memorable sleepwalking scene, we see how memories of the murders of Duncan, Banquo and Macduff's wife and children gnaw at her heartstrings and have corroded her nerve centers. The touching words, "The Thane of Fife had a wife," tell us that she can still feel for a murdered woman.